Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Well, today is National Mashed Potato Day. So, if you come from a country which likes to eat potatoes, enjoy your mashed potato today. We have that with everything, mashed potato. I mean, I don't, but it's very common here. It's one of our staple foods. More and more people, though, in order to lose weight, turn away from potatoes. And as a diabetic, I can't eat them anymore anyway because they're considered to be very starchy, to have too much starch. So I'm always looking for other alternatives that aren't so high in carbohydrates. Yes, National Mashed Potato Day, but they are delicious, really, with some butter and with some vegetables or other things. Oh, mashed potatoes. Yeah. You know, I was out yesterday. I wanted to make a podcast when I was out, but it was too windy. And I went to one of these cafes here in the UK, which has an all day breakfast. Now, for those of you who've been to the UK, you know about all day breakfasts because they're very, very unhealthy. They're usually called full breakfasts, English breakfasts. Here, some people call them the Irish breakfast, but it's the big one, with the toast, bacon, pork, uh, hash browns, that's deep fried bread, fried mushrooms, baked beans. I'm sure you've all seen it, or you've at least heard of it. It's kind of like a heart attack on a plate, to be honest. A heart attack is, when you take suddenly ill with a pain in your chest. So I'm using a metaphor there. A heart attack on a plate, meaning it's one of these things which can make you very ill if you're very unhealthy. The English breakfast has its own society. Yeah, there's the English Breakfast Society, which is fighting to protect it, because these days, of course, we all have jobs where we're sitting down, so we're kind of not taking enough exercise, and because of that, we're not really needing to eat such a big breakfast. I mean, my ancestors up until the 1980s, they were all going out doing manual labor every day. So they needed a big breakfast. And that tradition continued. In fact, Margaret Thatcher, she used to make a big breakfast for her husband every day before she went to continue her parliamentary affairs. Her husband, Dennis, I don't know what he did, but he was very skinny. He didn't have a lot of weight on him. But in those days, people used to move around more, didn't they? They used to move around, whereas my generation, and we're all sitting in front of computers now, so we don't need a big breakfast to give us energy. But the English breakfast with the fried potatoes, fried eggs, fried mushrooms, and baked beans, it continues to be very popular here. And I went to this cafe yesterday, and of course, the sign was there, all day breakfast. That means we serve the full breakfast all day. I mean, usually it's a smaller version of the big one that you've probably seen British people eat. Some people here go crazy for the English breakfast, but I must say nowadays it would be less popular unless you're working outside, maybe if you're fitting windows, if you're a glazier, or if you're a gardener, maybe where you're doing a lot of exercise, you could probably still have an English breakfast. But for someone like me who's on the computer, and well, I shouldn't have them anyway because I'm diabetic. It's not really very suitable because it would make you quite fat. Those cafes, little English cafes that sell lots of fried food and fried sandwiches, we usually refer to them as greasy spoon cafes because, of course, if they're serving food, there would be a lot of grease around. Grease just means oil. And I'm not talking about olive oil, more like vegetable oil or hydrogenated oil. There we are. So the English breakfast. Yes. So I went out yesterday and I went to this cafe. It was one of these typical greasy spoon cafes. I would have preferred to have gone to a top-notch cafe. Top-notch in English simply means top of the range. Okay, so you can describe anything as being top-notch. Oh, I had a top-notch meal last night. I went to a top-notch shop. I looked for a top-notch cafe. It means something a little bit higher in the ranking. You can use it as a synonym of excellent or first rate. You can also use it as a synonym of the word ace. You know, if you say something is very good, you can say, oh, that's ace. Ace being the very fast playing card. Ace 1, 2, 3, 4, and these things. Okay, ace. So, getting back to top notch, okay, I would have preferred to have gone to maybe a top-notch restaurants. There wasn't any around, but their English breakfast looked top-notch. It looked very nice. I have to say, although I didn't eat it, I just had a coffee. I could see the plates that other people were having, and although the cafe wasn't top-notch, the food definitely was. I was with a friend and he kept trying to insist that I have a full English breakfast, but I refused point blank. To refuse point blank is when you very directly say no. You don't do it the polite way by trying to, oh, I don't think so, not today. To refuse point blank is when you say no, no, absolutely not. Okay. So if your boss says, can you do this extra bit of work for me? And you say, no, I have too much. That's refusing point blank. Whereas if you say, oh, let me see, let me just check my work pile. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't take that on for you right now. That would be being very polite. So to refuse point blank is when you simply say the word no and is considered a little bit rude. Okay, so for example, if your boss in your next appraisal says, you've done very, very well, but I've noticed that when your colleagues ask you to assist, you often refuse point blank. It means you often just say the word no, so you're not a good team player. So there we are, to refuse point blank. So that's two idioms from today: to refuse point blank and top notch, which means top of the range if you're describing something. And we're talking about this English breakfast because today is National Mashed Potato Day in the United States. We don't really celebrate those things here. I'm sure some people do, but this idea of having a day for everything is probably very American. Although people here are now getting ready for a Halloween. Every year, those costumes seem to look scarier, don't they? Getting back to this English breakfast, yeah, some people call it the British breakfast because we all eat it. We often call it the English breakfast or the Irish breakfast. I think the Irish one is maybe a little bit bigger. And then there's also the places that you can buy it. So as well as these greasy spoon style cafes, you can also get it in most of our pubs, and many of them are marked all day breakfast, which is a slightly smaller version, I think. I think it's safe to say that. If you do want to know the history, do visit the English Breakfast Society's website. They tell us that this style of breakfast has been around since the 19th century. Some people refer to it as the fry-up. Oh, I'm just in the mood for a fry-up. But we don't usually ask for that in shops. And the other thing about the Big English Breakfast is you can have the vegetarian version. I mean, it's still deep fried. It's still very bad for you, but there is a vegetarian and sometimes a vegan version available. And that's when they don't give you eggs, but they'll give you more of the bread, and they'll give you vegan or vegetarian sausages. Apparently, there's a few places in Hong Kong do it. Someone was telling me that yesterday in a class. Well, I suppose that would be right because Hong Kong was one of our areas for a while, one of our territories, wasn't it? So I suppose you would find the breakfast there. I think, though, these days the English breakfast appeals to people who work outside because they need something warm before they leave the house. So it still has its popularity, but I would say these days it's more related to occupation and probably education as well, because if you've been out drinking all night, as many English people do, the Big English Breakfast actually helps to settle your belly. Okay, so I'm not saying it's a cure for a hangover, but many people here would assume that it is. It gets your belly ready for the day and would help to maybe sober you up quite quickly. So it does serve a very real purpose in a society which feels a need to drink a lot. So that's maybe another reason why people like it so much. I'm sure there's also urban myths about it. I mean, I remember when I was a child, for example, getting my tonsils removed. You know, that's those things at the back of your throat. Yeah. Uh, Children often have them removed. So I remember having my tonsils removed in hospital, and the doctor in those days, they thought that Guinness, the Irish beer, was good for you because it made you fat. So after I had my tonsils removed, and bearing in mind I was 12 years old, they gave me a little drop of Guinness because they thought that helped the recovery process. Now, that kind of thinking has been completely removed, but it shows how ingrained alcohol is in our society. And so with the big breakfast, I mean, this lump of fat, and that's all it is. I mean, it's just pure fat. It's things which are deep fried. I think we are becoming more aware that it's quite dangerous. You know, as I said at the beginning, it's more like a heart attack on a plate. You know, it's not good for you at all. So we are becoming more educated now, but remember, we don't celebrate foods. We use food to stay warm. We use food to give us energy. But if someone said to me, "Oh, what's your ideal breakfast?" I would say, "Well, ideal breakfast. I've never really thought about that before, which breakfast I would prefer. But I do know one thing from traveling. Don't give me a bit of bread and call it breakfast, you know. Here, when we go and stay in hotels, sometimes they only offer toasts for breakfast. And to make it seem more acceptable, they'll call it a continental breakfast, where you have a variety of cheeses and perhaps some bread, maybe some cereal as well. But yeah, I always joke with my friends when I'm traveling. I always say, "Oh, don't give me a bit of bread and call it breakfast. I'm looking for something a bit more. Maybe not a full English breakfast, but I'd always be looking at least for eggs." Yes, yes. I always end up eating 3 times as much as everyone else with continental breakfasts because I want to fill my belly. So you see, we don't really care about food. So that's why we're able to eat this kind of stuff in the morning. It's more about what's going to make us feel good or ready to leave the house, not about what it looks like or how it tastes. And there we are. That's an introduction to the big English breakfast. The next time I'm out, I'm going to get into a cafe and order some coffee, and I'll describe what people are eating. But the big English breakfast is up there. It's considered to be one of our things. But more and more of us, I think, are turning away from that kind of thing. I don't think I could eat one now, even if I wanted to. It just doesn't appeal to me. There we are. Okay, right. See you all. Bye.